Hi, everyone. Welcome to day 13. As I wrap up with you this portion about helping you promote who you are and what you do during your interview, I am going to preface today's conversation with this. There's no way you can fully prepare for every interview question you're going to get. So many of my clients come to me, or people who are interested in coaching come to me and they say, I'm just not getting the interview. I get too nervous in the interview. I keep flubbing up the interview. The interview is not the problem. The problem is in how well you tell your story. And so much of what we have been doing during this challenge has been around telling your story from that place of value and service. If you don't know how to tell your story, then no one's going to really be interested in hiring you. The way that we tell our story with evidence, facts, emotion, data points, and energy is what allows us to get people interested in who we are and what we do. If we fail to do that, they're not going to want to talk to us anymore. Or what they're going to say is, we're just not the right fit for them. In telling our story, we want to communicate that we are the right fit based on our talents and our skills. And so, how do you actually prepare for an interview? You do it with a little exercise I call story buckets. Now, I'm going to attach a worksheet for you after this video that's going to help you work on those story buckets by just taking one particular story and working it through. But here's essentially the idea. Throughout your career and your experience, you have had things happen to you. There have been some really monumental, exciting type things. There have been some challenging things, and there have been some not so great things. Where you are in this moment is based on the totality of your experiences. And when you go to interview for a position, it's those experiences that contribute to how you tell your story. So I want you to imagine a bucket, kind of like a bucket you would take to the beach and put sand in. And you've got your bucket and you've got your shovel. And on the outside of that bucket is a certain story. Maybe it's how you navigated to your last promotion. Maybe it's how you led a certain project that was recognized by the company and where you worked. Maybe it's about dealing with a difficult client or patient and how you were able to help turn them around. Whatever the title of that story is, I want you to imagine putting a label on the outside of the bucket. Now, the sand are all the components to that story, and each shovel of sand that you put into the bucket is another piece of the story. So the first part of the exercise is to identify the label that goes on the outside of the bucket. And then the second part is to start bulleting out all of the components to that story. What did you do? Who did you work with? Who were the key players? What were the results? What were the things that you learned? What was the impact? What was the value? What made it so monumental that it stands out as a milestone for you in your career? All of those things need to go into the bucket. Because when we're asked a question in an interview, and this is why I suggest you have 5 of these story buckets. Whenever we're asked a question in the interview, our mind is going to take us to that bucket. And it's the things in that bucket that are going to allow us to answer the question. With the tell me about yourself question, I mentioned to you about keeping it to a minute. For any question that you are asked after that, your response should be no longer than 2 minutes. And DDI has a great protocol, if you will, called the STAR method, which stands for situation, task, action, result. I'll have that in the worksheet for you. A lot of you are already familiar with the STAR method and maybe a little frustrated by it. I'm hoping the story bucket exercise will help you do that. Okay. And in doing that, what you're going to do is think about an interview question that you're going to get. And from there, you are going to dig into that bucket and pull out all the components of the story that are going to be put into the STAR method and allow you to answer the question. So let me give you an example. Let's say the question is something like, tell me about a time when you saved a project a lot of money, or you were able to generate additional revenue to help that project thrive. Now, years ago for me, one of the things in my story bucket had to do with running a calculator drive at my school. So as many of you know, I had a 25-year career in education before I launched my coaching practice full time. And at the middle school where I taught at, we were looking for ways to fund our technology budget. And we got everybody on board to do a calculator drive, which meant students would be able to buy a calculator at the school. And then we worked with our vendor that based on so many units we sold would then in turn fund classroom sets of calculators. So teachers would have additional calculators, be it for their classroom use, for testing, and we got additional technology through that fundraising effort as well. Well, over the course of 3 years, we were able to generate over $10,000 in additional technology for the school. It was pretty impressive. And it was all done by a very grassroots effort by running this calculator drive. So for me, that was the story that I would tell when I got asked a question like that. So what was the situation? The situation was teachers and students were in need of technology, and the school did not have the budget to fund the initiative fully in the first year that we did this. The task was creating a fundraising stream that would generate additional technology for the school over the next 3 years. The action was not only implementing the fundraising drive, but getting internal stakeholders on board. That meant other teachers in my mathematics department. It meant working with the vendor. It meant getting the PTA involved, the administrative support, all of those things in order to then process the orders and understand the refunds or the rebates that we were going to get from it. The result was getting over $10,000 in free technology into the school. When we know our story, we know how we can bucket it. And we bucket it based on all of those components within the STAR method. You all have an interesting story. You have an interesting story to tell, and it's what generates that interest from that place of value and service. And so as you start putting the components of your story into your bucket, know that anytime you practice or prep for an interview, that you are going to be able to take the components of that story, fit it into the protocol, the STAR method, and use that to answer your question. Another way of thinking about it is that every time we tell a story, we need a very clear beginning, middle, and end. It's like wrapping up the package and putting the bow on it. So in terms of telling the story, you always want to make sure that you give the interviewer, the interview panel enough context so they can understand what the story is. And then You always want to make sure you nail the results. This is why it was important. This is what happened. This was the impact. This was the value. And you also want to make sure that you communicate it in terms of this was my responsibility. This was my ownership. This is what I did. Heart-centered leaders and professionals often struggle with that because they're not used to talking in the singular. They're very good at talking in the plural. In an interview, they want to know what you did. So we do the story buckets as a way of honing in specifically on where your leadership or your management had an active role in helping you get the results that you did. So for today, I want you to find the worksheet right after this video, and you're going to see my little beach bucket and its shovel. And you're going to go ahead and start listing out one story bucket and all of the data points behind it. That's what's going to help you answer the interview questions as well. So think about the questions you've answered well or the ones that have tripped you up. Use that as an example to find ways to take your story bucket and fit it into that interview question. All right. We wrap everything up tomorrow. I am so excited to see all of you live tomorrow. But in the meantime, get working on your story buckets. Make it a great rest of your day. I'll see you then. Thanks.